This is her goal. She's a Terminator. So that's already happening. And my students that are coming through our program are getting placed in these roles. They haven't gotten through yet a lot in terms of being an actual scientist, but they're getting there. Sports scientists in the NBA are being hired, females, in terms of like big data collection, and sports science and tech we'll cover, in another discussion. But I think it's happening. Whether or not the cultural and social, I can't speak to that end of the equation. What I can speak to, though, is one of the things I think is most fun coming forward scientifically is, a number of years ago, NIH came through with their mandates of saying it's no longer acceptable to exclude women from scientific research, right? Because we just did that for decades.
Well, what happened, just to fill this in, because I think it's worth noting, is that for many years, studies even on rodents were mainly carried out on male rodents because the assumption turned out to be wrong, but the assumption was that the physiology of female rodents, because they don't have a menstrual cycle, it's not 28 days, they have an estrous cycle, it's 4 days, or a different type of cycle, that would somehow disrupt the data. Turns out that's entirely wrong. Now it's actually required. When you sit on a grant study panel, which are the people who evaluate grants, they literally say, did they meet the criteria for sex as a biological variable? Here we're not talking about sex as the verb, we're talking about sex as biological sex. And if you don't say yes, that's a strong hit against the grant. And if you say yes, then it checks off that box. So it's now required that both male and female rodents and humans be studied in a given study, unless the study is specifically geared toward understanding that it only exists in one or the other population, such as studies, menopause, for instance, totally. Menstrual cycle, andropause, for instance. But no, this is extremely important. I'm excited to hear that.
So where I was going to go with that is actually, so that was step one, which is cool. You got to include them. Where we haven't gotten to yet, but I've seen more and more grant applications come through for this. It's just the funding hasn't hit yet, which is, it's one thing to let women be in the same studies. That's great. It's another thing, though, to start performing high-performance research specifically for female questions. That has not happened yet, and that's just like a funding issue, right? We haven't gotten money yet. People aren't supporting that. We don't get a lot of financial support for sports science, but we can't track down the money yet of someone going, I want to do a study in female athletes that answers female athlete questions. These won't help men. These are questions specific to the female. That's the next step, right? That's where we got to get to, so we can say, maybe we should do things differently around training and recovery, or we shouldn't, or it doesn't matter. There's a handful of, not lower quality, but like some studies, I don't love them yet. There just needs to be a ton of work. Birth control is a very good example, right? The information for women, female athletes, or even just like hard exercisers, you don't have to be a competitive athlete, around what is birth control doing, what types, how should I manage that, what conversations should I be having with my doctor, almost nothing. Like, women have nothing to go on for high performance stuff. So what if I'm trying to compete in an event or run a race? Like all those types of questions should be answered. Normative value, normative data, performance testing, like it's just not there on the female. So that's an area I think, like, if somebody really wanted to make a change, that the scientists want to do it. I know I've talked to so many in our field that would really love to explore it because it's getting there. Like I said, the coaching side is getting there. They're seeing it. They're hiring these people. I'm seeing it in my students. My following is not all men. Like, it's a very large percentage of females, and all I do is post about exercise science. This is all I do. So,
well, this podcast is we know very clearly the audience is 50% women, 50% men.
That's right.
Which is great.
So just to jump back on our history discussion and to finish that point of where we're at now and where I think we're going to go or should go. So we walked through the bodybuilding, kind of running everything, and people walking into a gym, anytime they lift weights, they're making all of their choices based on the assumption that maximizing muscle size is the goal. And clearly that's not the case. There are other adaptations you may be after. So we talked about how that had problems, and then we talked about how some of these other forms of exercise filled those gaps, and then what problems those things introduced. Well, I think we're actually at a point where that pendulum is kind of slowly shifting into the middle. What I mean by that is, if you want to maximize muscle strength, we look towards the powerlifting community. If you want to maximize muscle power, we're going to look to the weightlifting community. If you want to look for muscular endurance or well-roundedness, maybe we look into the CrossFit communities and some of these obstacle course races or functionality things. So what we can do now is generate protocols that get us the exact adaptations we want and not ones we don't want, because we can look back at each of these different styles of training and pick and choose optimal protocols or combinations for them. So if somebody simply wants to get healthy, like we talked about when we listed the 9 adaptations, and I mentioned health wasn't one of them. That's because what determines your health versus what determines my optimal health differs. So if I need more hypertrophy, I can look towards bodybuilding concepts. But if I have enough, or maybe for personal reasons, I decide I have too much, or I don't want to add any more, then I can say, hey, how can I get stronger without getting bigger? And boom, I look towards powerlifting concepts. How can I get more powerful? How can I get faster? But I don't, again, want to lose fat. Okay, great. Or if I want physique changes. So we have all these different areas we can pick and choose from that have expertise in specific adaptations and develop ourselves perfect protocols based on that information.
I'd like to take a brief break to acknowledge our sponsor, Inside Tracker. Inside Tracker is a personalized nutrition platform that analyzes data from your blood and DNA to help you better understand your body and help you reach your health goals. I've long been a believer in getting regular blood work done for the simple reason that many of the factors that impact your immediate and long-term health and well-being can only be analyzed from a quality blood test. One issue with a lot of blood tests and DNA tests out there, however, is that you get information back about various levels of lipids and hormones and metabolic factors, etc., but you don't know what to do with that information. Inside Tracker makes knowing what to do with all that information exceedingly easy. They have a personalized platform that lets you see what your specific numbers are, of course, but then also what sorts of behavioral do's and don'ts, what sorts of nutritional changes, what sorts of supplementation would allow you to bring those levels into the ranges that are optimal for you. If you'd like to try Inside Tracker, you can visit insidetracker.com/Huberman to get 20% off any of Inside Tracker's plans. Again, that's insidetracker.com/Huberman to get 20% off. So with the understanding in mind as to how we all, myself included, arrived at such lopsided fitness, too much endurance, not enough strength, too much strength, not enough endurance, it's really hard to imagine that anyone's perfect in this regard. Can you walk us through the 9 different adaptations that you mentioned earlier and give us a way to assess our level of ability or our level of adaptation in each of those 9?
All right, the very first one we want to talk about is movement skill. Now, set aside sport specific, so I'm not going to give you an assessment for optimal golf technique swing. This is really about human movement so that you stay injury-free and you can continue to train for as long as possible. So what are the minimum requirements? Now, if you can have access to a highly qualified physical therapist or movement specialist, that's the best route, right? Go to them, have them identify all of your movement patterns, overhead pressing, squatting, running, all these things. That's your gold standard. If you want to do it yourself, though, here's a very simple 4-step solution. So the way that I teach this is I go joint by joint. And so I think of this just as the major ones: your shoulder, your elbow, your low back, hip, knee, and ankle. Okay. Now what you can do is do a representative movement for you. So if you bench a lot, use the bench. If you do pull-ups, use the pull-up. If you squat, do that. I would recommend doing an upper body press, an upper body pull, a lower body press, and lower body pull. An example would be a push-up, a pull-up or a bent row, a squat, and then a deadlift. That would be a very, very well-rounded approach. What you're going to do is do that movement, and I would record it for yourself and record a frontal view and a side view. Probably do 3 to 10 repetitions per angle, okay? Slow and controlled. You don't need any body weight. What you want to do is move, and you want to look for 4 key things at every joint, all right? So again, imagine I'm doing a squat. I'm going to do a squat, and I'm going to focus on just my ankle. And I'm going to look for these 4 things of the ankle. And then I'm going to go back and watch my knee and look for these same 4 things of the knee to the hip, etc. All right? So what are these 4 things? Number 1 is you want to look for symmetry. So symmetry is front to back, left to right, and your right limb and your left limb. All right? And so what we want to look for are, if they aren't moving perfectly, that's fine. But you want to see, is one moving further ahead than the other one? Is one turning to the side and one's not? Is one fidgeting and twitching around differently? So you want to look just to check to see and make sure that they're stable. That's one. Number 2, you want to look for stability. So key indicators here are things like if you can't do a squat, a controlled squat where your knees don't start shaking. Like that would be an instability issue. So can you do the movement slow? Can you pause at the bottom? Maybe 3 seconds, maybe 5 seconds or 10. You should have complete control of that movement at all of these joints. Are your hips sliding to one side when you stand up? Is one elbow closer to your body when you're benching and the other one's more flared out? These are the things I'm talking about, right? I'm not worried about what angle they should be at or not. You're simply looking for asymmetries or instabilities. All right, so again, as you're pushing up, does one elbow start flipping and twitching and going all over the place? The third one is what I call awareness. So there are a lot of movement technique issues that are simply people don't know. And so you'll watch them squat. I do this in my classes all the time. I'll have 100 kids out there squatting, and you'll see some horrible squat technique. And then when you just tell them, hey, did you realize your heels are supposed to be on the ground at all times when you squat? They're like, oh, okay. And they can correct it. It's not actually a movement flaw. It was just simply an awareness. I didn't know, and then I actually didn't realize that that was happening in that position. So we want all of our joints to be going through a general full range of motion, which is number 4. So the ankles during like a squat, your knees should be able to go as far over your toes as possible while maintaining good position, your feet flat on the floor, your 3 points of contact, your whole foot, and you're not compromising another joint. So that's all you're going to look for, those 4 things: symmetry, stability, awareness, and range of motion through each joint, through each movement. It sounds difficult and time-consuming. It's really not, right? You can generally kind of clear these things in 1 or 2 repetitions in a couple of seconds. And what you're really going to look for, there's lots of scoring schemes. You can, test that physical therapists will sort of you. I just look for absolutely terrible, like can't do it at all, minor flaw, or pretty close to good. That's really all I'm looking for. So my scoring system is 0, 1, 3. 0 is like you're not going to do this exercise because you're at a very high acute risk. You might get hurt on rep 1 tomorrow. Number 1, like a score of 1 is like, there's a minor flaw here. We can probably do it, but we need to be cautious of load and volume. And the other one is maybe it's perfect, maybe it's not, but go ahead and sort of do it on a reasonable protocol. You'll be fine. So that's generally what you would need to do is a cost-free method of identifying good movement technique within any of the things that you would do.
What about speed?
I actually don't think this is one most people should test. If you're a high-performance athlete, we can run a 40-yard dash, or we can do some different things with a velocity transducer on a barbell. If you're a weightlifter or something, but for most people, pure speed is really maximum velocity or acceleration, or kind of the 2 ways we break it down. It's not just generally not that necessary to test.
What about number 3, power, which I believe before you told me was speed times force?
So the reason why I don't worry too much about speed is because you can infer a lot of it from a power test, and a power test is easier to do as well as easier to train for most people. So the cost-free version here is a simple broad jump. So this is stand with normal position, jump out as far in front of you as you possibly can, and measure the distance between where you started and the back of your heel where it lands. A super basic number to look for there is your height. So you should be able to broad jump how tall you are. If you're 5'5", you should hit 5'5", 6'5", etc. It's not perfect. That's going to ratchet down a little bit, about 15% for females. They just simply don't have the power in general that men have, and so you're going to want to bring that down a little bit. But it's a very crude number. If you were to look at like a high-performance NFL player, if they're 6 feet tall, they're going to be jumping like 9 to 10 to 11 feet. If you can jump your body height, we're not looking for optimization in this particular test, but you are looking for red flags. If you can jump your body height, you're going to be just fine.
That's incredibly straightforward, and yet I have one question.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that I can squat down as low as I need to before I jump. I can swing my arms from back to front as hard or with as much momentum as I can muster. And when I land, you said I'm going to take the measure from where the back of my heels.
You want to measure the distance you actually covered. So to clarify, there's no running approach here. There's no steps into it. You're going to stand at a still. Yeah, you can swing, bounce as much as you'd like to do. You're going to projectile off. So you're going to measure the distance from the tip of your toe. So basically, stand behind the line, and then the furthest point back where you land. So basically, the worst possible score, not the best possible, because your feet won't land symmetrically. One's probably going to be a little bit farther. Now, technically, if you fall backwards and your hand touches the ground, we mark that number. But in this case, just use the furthest point back of your back heel and go from there.
I'll be trying it tomorrow morning.
Now, if you have access to a little bit more technology, or you just really want to know a better number, a classic vertical jump is a good starting place. So you can actually do this in a simple, cost-free way. You can just measure two of your hands, put them together so that both of your middle fingers are touching. Overlap them and put them directly over your head. Okay, and then you kind of want to reach up as high as you can get, and you mark that on the wall. My brother and I used to do this all the time. We would take a highlighter, the yellow ones, and color as much as we could on our fingertips, touch the wall so that the highlighter would stain the wall. If you actually go back to my house from my childhood, you'll see these markers all over our house.
I'm sure our parents were thrilled.
Yeah, my dad didn't care. He didn't care. He's just like, whatever you guys do, whatever you want. So you want to measure that. And then, of course, you're going to jump with those two hands and touch as high as you can up. And you're going to measure the distance between your standing reach and the actual height that you jump there. Now, the reason you're doing it two-handed, by the way, is because if you do one-handed, you can actually reach pretty high by offsetting your shoulders. And now you're getting into differences of, who has more shoulder mobility, who has the ability to kind of get up there. A 2-foot standard or a two-handed standard approach is there. Same thing, no running approach here. You can dip, you can drive, you can and do all those things. You can swing your arms, but you're going to be a two-handed touch is a general way to do that. You want to look for a number of something like 24 inches or higher. If you're past the age of 50, that number can come down a little bit to closer to 20. And again, for females, it's going to be ratcheted down about 15% everywhere you want to go. If you're a middle-aged female and you're jumping 20 inches, you're in a pretty good spot. You're going to be looking really nice there. So now, if you can do that on a force plate, that's even better. So these are very basically scales that will go out to multiple digits, sometimes 5 to 9 digits past 0. And you're going to stand on these things, you can do the exact same test. And these are very interesting because they'll tell you not only how high you jump, but they'll tell you how much force you put into the ground. They can also tell you how long it took you. This is called your rate of force development, as well as impulse and speed and a bunch of other stuff, which are important to help you understand where on the power spectrum you need to be. So you would do that in addition to using some sort of velocity transducer on a barbell. So a very classic thing to do would be, let's say you're going to do a squat, and you're going to put this device on the barbell, and that's going to measure the speed at which the barbell moves. And you're going to do that at 40% of your one repetition max, 50%, 60%, 70, 80, 90, up to 100. And that allows you to create what's called a force velocity curve. And you can start to see at what point when you start loading things heavy, do you start slowing down too much. And that'll tell you what part of the force velocity curve that you want to train in to optimize your power. Why that's important? A lot of people will do things like, when I'm training for power, how heavy should I lift? Well, the general answer people say is 30% of your one rep max, but that's actually not true at all. What's most optimal for power development, which we'll discuss more much later, is depending on where you're flawed in the force velocity curve. So if you have access to technology like that, that can give you a lot more insight and information. If not, do the broad jump test or the highlighter on your fingertips and jump and touch the wall test.
At Andy Galpin's house.
Hey, just, come along. The walls are already messed up. Just go ahead and come up to Washington and we'll do it.
Fantastic. What about strength?
Right. So strength is really important. You need to measure this in multiple areas. And we'll start off with grip strength. Okay, so you can do this in two ways. You can buy a hand grip dynamometer. Now, these are anywhere between $20 to $100 anywhere. These actually used to be, like when I was in school, like hundreds of dollars. And now you can literally buy them on any website for $25. So my honest recommendation is technically that's not cost-free. I know your whole thing about the cost-free protocols, but $25, I'm calling that basically cost-free. You can bring that in and test that. And that's just a little device where you're going to squeeze and you're going to do, and I would do your right hand and your left hand. You want to look for asymmetries there, but you want to look for something like, typically they're going to give you a value in kilograms. And you want to look for something like a minimum score here of 40 kilograms. Ideally, you're up past 60 would be a really good spot to be in. You want to make sure that there's no less than 10% variation between your left and right hand. Your non-dominant hand actually shouldn't be that much weaker in this test. So what you'll actually see a lot of times is the non-dominant can be oftentimes stronger because the dominant hand is more for movement precision and writing, things like that. So you want them to be close. If you're a male and you're under 40 kilograms on a hand grip dynamometer, like we're going to need to train that. If you're a female, it's not that much lower, but about 35 kilograms is the cutoff point. If you're above 55, we can add it to your training, but I'm not worried about leaving it out of your training. If you're a female, if it's above 50, that's my sort of cutoff of where we want to go. So that's a fairly cheap one. Another one that you can actually do is just a dead hang. So you can hold on to any bar, ideally one that is thin enough to where you can wrap your whole hand around it. So you don't want to be using a giant fat grip. You're going to have a false reading here. So something like going to the gym and jumping on any pull-up bar or pull-up rack. And you want to hang, and this is a simple time test. So in general, we should be able to hang for a minimum of 30 seconds is what we're looking for. 30 to kind of 50 seconds is my like good, but we could probably get better here. If you're cruising above 60 seconds, I'm generally pretty happy. This is actually a good example of when females tend to be better. Grip strength on women tends to be strong, and they can hang for quite a long time. So those standards don't really change that much for women. Now, if you are exceptionally large, this thing doesn't scale perfectly. You know, if you're 240 pounds and even if you're lean, it's just hard to hang and hold 240 pounds. Conversely, if you're 145 pounds, even if you're unhealthy, you're going to be able to hang for a long time. It's just not that much weight to carry. So just rough numbers to start off with.
So that's grip strength. What about strength elsewhere in the body?
The primary ones, you can do an upper body strength test if you would like, although it's not technically something we do very often. Happy to do a 1 rep max bench press or something like that. That's great. The one I'm generally more interested in is a leg extension test. And the reason I like this is a back squat is better. A barbell back squat is, look, that's my jam. That's my life, right? It's just very technically demanding. And it's challenging. You need spotters. You need comfort. A lot goes into this. So for the average person, a leg extension test is fairly standardized. You don't have to worry about technique, and people can just get into it and go. And so what you want to look for there is a couple of standards you want to hit. Again, a very simple answer here is body weight. Can you do a leg extension with your body weight?
How? One repetition?
One repetition.
I can answer that right now.
Can you?
No.
You can?
No, I can hack squat a reasonable amount of weight, but I was on the leg extension this morning, and it was a Nautilus machine, and I certainly could not leg extension my body weight.
Let me clarify. Were you doing a single leg?
No.
So bilateral, you can't leg extension your body weight?
No, but I certainly can hamstring curl my body weight.
Oh, okay. So we maybe have some deficiencies in our quads that we need to go after here. But that's a pretty good number you want to be at. If you go up in age past age 40, every decade, that can come down about 10%, and you'll still be in a pretty good slot. So if you're 50 years old and you're 170 pounds, if you can do 160, you're in a pretty good sort of spot. And then you could just, again, take it down about 10% every decade after 40. But prior to 40, there's really no change in strength. But certainly somebody in their 40s to 50s should be able to leg extension their body weight.
Noted. I look forward to our discussion a bit later, talking about how to build strength.
Yeah. Any of these strength tests, they don't have to be done to a technical true 1 rep max. You can use what are called repetition conversion equation. So put on a load that you think is kind of close to your maximum and just do it for as many reps as you can. As long as it's under 5 reps total, you can then actually go online and enter that into any number of calculators anywhere, and it will tell you, okay, you did 3 repetitions at 200 pounds. Your 1 rep max is probably 215, whatever. So there's estimate equations. So if you don't want to spend the time or you're not truly comfortable, like absolutely going to your true 1 rep max, just get to a number that's fairly close and do as many as you can, and then go online. Again, 1 rep max estimator equations are everywhere. If you get past 5 repetitions or so, the accuracy of those equations starts going down. So don't put on something and go, I did 12 reps of it, and then try to figure out your 1 rep max. It'll get close. You start moving past that, you're just getting worse and worse and worse accuracy. So I want to make sure whether you're doing the leg extension test or a front squat test, you don't technically have to do an absolute 1 rep max. If neither of those are an option, another one I like a lot here is simply a front squat or a goblet squat hold. So you're going to hold a weight in front of your chest, whether a kettlebell is great here, a dumbbell is fine here, and you want to hold about half of your body weight. Go all the way to the bottom position and try to hold that for about 45 seconds. So it's a pretty good indicator of, number one, your position. It's hard to be in a bad position for that long at that load, as well as core strength and low back stability. So it's a very different indicator than say the leg extension test, but it's a really nice one. So it doesn't require many moving parts. It's more difficult than the leg extension, but it's quite a bit more functional, and it's going to give you insight into a lot more areas than just the quadriceps.
So 45 seconds down at the bottom of the squat.
Yep.
And then returning to a standing position.
Yep. And if you can't do the return, I'm not that worried. But as long as you can hold that good position without a technical breakdown in that 45 seconds, that's a really good spot. As an intro, I want a third of your body weight for 30 seconds.
Terrific. I plan to attempt all of those strength tests very soon. What about hypertrophy?
Sure. Actually, before we get into that, I want to jump back really quickly. It's important to add a couple of caveats to the strength training stuff. So there's two that I want to do. Number one, these are assuming you are technically proficient. So I don't want you to do any exercise to exhaustion or to maximum strength if you're not comfortable with your technique. So adjust these accordingly. If you're not comfortable with the front squat, do the leg extension. If you're not even comfortable with that, do something different. So we never want to utilize maximum testing if it's going to come with a consequence of serious acute injury. So that's the most important flag. The second one is your warm-up protocol will have a huge effect on your actual results. And so whenever you do these tests, especially if you're going to do a test and then a test again down the line, you want to make sure that that warm-up protocol is standardized. Now, again, the NSCA, and I can give you resources, has specific guides for exactly what to do for your warm-up protocol prior to 1 rep max testing. So we can go there and you can look that stuff up. We can add that to show notes or something.
Yeah, and I think when we get into a deeper discussion about strength and hypertrophy and resistance training in general, maybe we could touch into the best warm-up protocol. I know I have mine, and I'm certain it's going to be suboptimal based on everything.
Maybe that's
based on every conversation we've ever had where I learned all the things I'm doing incorrectly. But I do make changes on the basis of what you tell me.
It's not incorrectly so much as it is like suboptimal.
That's a very kind way of telling me it's incorrect. Thank you. What about hypertrophy?
So the thing you want to pay attention to here is you have the aesthetic portion of hypertrophy. That's entirely up to you. There is no rationale. You can decide what you feel like looks good or doesn't look good. That's irrelevant. There is a sufficient amount you need to have where below that is detrimental to your health, regardless of your outcomes. And so the best way to do this is a couple of ways. Any sort of body composition test it can do this. So whether this is a scan through like a DEXA scan, which is a gold standard, or other ways of bioelectrical impedance or other ways. So there's a ton of different tests you can get that are pretty close. Okay, so what you want to pay attention to when you get like a DEXA scan is a number called FFMI. And so that stands for Fat-Free Mass Index. So you can look at, again, any number of online calculators. These are all standard. So it doesn't actually matter where you pull them up. You don't have to worry about looking it up and whether or not it's right or not or something. And so that's going to actually tell you if you have sufficient muscle mass. And so a number you want to look for in general is something like, if you're a man, your FFMI should be something like 20 or higher. If you're a woman, you want to look for something like 18. So those are the targets. If you get past like 24, 25 for a man, that's a lot of muscle mass, assuming you're reasonably lean. Now, if your FFMI is like 24, 25, but your body fat is like 40%, you're actually just a very, very large individual. You're not in a great spot. So when we say these sort of numbers, it's the assumption that you're probably sub 30% body fat for a man and sub 35 for a woman. So those are the numbers. There are online calculators. All you really need to know is your total body weight, your body fat percentage, and then your height. You can enter those three numbers, and then they'll tell you your FFMI score, and it'll correct for an adjusted value. And then most of those will actually tell you the grading rubric in them, so good, average, bad, etc. But those are the numbers we look at. If you are, as a man, sub 17, as a woman, sub 15, now we're in an area of pretty severe physiological detriment for insufficient muscle. And some of our later discussions will talk about why that matters.
So that's not sub 17% body fat. That's just specifically the FFMI.
That's correct, yeah.
What about muscular endurance? Is this where you're going to tell me I need to do wall sits?
So this is really nice. You can do any number of tests here. A standard plank is a good testament of muscular endurance. So can you hold a front plank for 60 seconds? Can you hold a side plank for 45 seconds? Pretty easy. If you're able to do a push-up. So if you can't, that sort of tells you alone. It's actually interesting. If you can't do a single push-up, that's not a muscular endurance issue. That's actually now a strength issue because that's a 1 rep max problem. So we want to be able to do, for a general male, we should have no problem doing 25 plus consecutive push-ups.
I apologize for interrupting you, but as long as we're talking about push-ups, you just mentioned form. Are we talking chest touching the ground, elbows breaking right angles? What is a proper push-up according to your laboratory?
Unless you have a very specific reason to limit range of motion, I want all my testing done through a full joint range of motion. This is different for the person. So it's individualized to them. But in general, for a push-up, this would be a full, complete lockout of the elbows on the top and a full chest touch or close to it at the ground. You can do it different. It doesn't really matter, but just keep it standard from your pre-test to your post-test if you're trying to mark progress. Okay, but for us, unless we have a very specific reason, we're going full range of motion for all of these tests.
Okay, so 25 push-ups
25
for a male?
push-ups for a male is a standard, and even something like 10 is a number we're looking for. Again, it's kind of minimum categories for an upper body muscular endurance.
And not to get too down in the weeds, but I have observed other people, of course, never myself. No, I'm kidding. But observed other people pausing at maybe at repetition 15, catching their breath, and then continuing. Or you
that would be
continue
a failed test.
like a piston.
That would be a failed test.
So no pauses.
Correct.
Just up, down, and trying to hit at least 10, but ideally 25 or more.
I learned this lesson in one of our studies probably 9 years ago, where we didn't clarify that, and so we actually had an individual. He wasn't being nefarious. He just figured out if I do a couple, take a quick break and do a couple, he like quadrupled his post-test results from his pre-test result because he figured out that little hack there. So you want to standardize it. It's not that I'm against or have some sort of strong belief. It's just trying to keep protocol standardized, and which means any break, failed test.
So 10 to 25 push-ups minimum for males. What about for females?
So I'll clarify. If it's sub 10 for a man, that's again in your like very severe red flag problem. We really like to see a number above 25. Okay, that's where we're anchoring. Anything between 10 and 25 is like, yeah, but not severe.
It means they have work to do.
We have work to do.
Right. And for females?
For a female, you're going to scale that sort of back. So a female, the answer could be as little as 0, right? So you're going to see that. Can you do a full position? If they're in that position, we're generally not going to do a muscular endurance test from the knees. We already know the answer is you're 0. We'll actually default to another test, which I'll talk about in a second here. So for those folks, anything that's going to scale down a little bit, right? So basically you're looking at 15 is that marker, like 25 was for the male, where I want to see above 15. And if I do, we're good. Anything between 5 to 15 is a number of like, okay. If you're sub 5, like we generally have some problems. And if that is different between 1 and 0, then like now 0 is a problem. So we should be able to do that.
So if a female cannot do 10 full push-ups.
Yeah. 10 full push-ups is hard for a female depending on size.
Okay, let's say a female can't do 5 full push-ups. You said rather than go to a knees down version, what would you do to assess their muscular endurance? And would you then also encourage them to work on their strength?
Well, absolutely. So again, if they can do anything less than 3, you're going to be strength. In fact, if you want to look at muscular endurance in general, so this is a bit of a off topic, but I promise I'll keep it short and I'll come right back. When I was a doctoral student, I had 2 lab mates. One of them was a runner, female, 120 pounds, something like that, small. The other one was a male, and he was basically like a straight bro. Like he lifts weights, doesn't do any other sort of training, does like a very classic, not training program, but kind of training. And they were sort of bantering back and forth for a while. And basically she was saying, you're so unfit, you can't run at all. And he's saying, you're so weak, you can't do a pull-up. And so they challenged each other to a competition. They said at the end of the year, the girl is going to do 26 pull-ups and the guy had to run a marathon. So 26 miles. So that was the thing. And then there was some sort of consequence for whoever sort of failed it. So the guy quickly tried to figure out how the hell am I going to run 26 miles when I have not run a mile in like many, many, many years. So he just started running. 3 miles, 4 miles, whatever. Of course, both of them ran immediately to me, right? And then she was like, how the hell, I can't do a pull-up. And I was like, great. And I gave her a very specific maximal strength protocol. And she was like, whoa, I want to go to the assisted pull-up machine and work on doing like sets of 25 because I've got to get my muscular endurance up. And I tried to explain to her, your muscular endurance is irrelevant if you can't do one. It's never going to matter. She did the muscular endurance protocol for the entire thing, didn't listen to me. The end of the year came, she still produced exactly 0 pull-ups. So point is, if you look at muscular endurance, where is it strength and where is it actually muscular endurance? The general sort of number that you're looking for is under like 80%. Right, that's going to tell you, is this a muscular endurance problem or is this an absolute strength problem?
Under 80% of a 1 repetition maximum.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So what I mean by that is this. In fact, this actually leads into your question. The other way to assess muscular endurance is take the exact strength test you did from the talk 5 minutes ago. Which one did you do? Load that to 75% and then do that for as many repetitions as you can. And that is a tremendous barometer of muscular endurance. So if you were able to do 200 pounds on your leg extension test, put 75% on that and do that as many reps as you can. You want to look for more than 8 repetitions. If you are below 8 repetitions, then we have a muscular endurance problem, right? If it is higher than that, if you got 15 or 20, then we know we have probably some problems in your peak strength or the test itself. So that is a good 8 to 12 sort of number is where you want to be looking at for there.
What about anaerobic capacity?
This one's more challenging. You either have to go to a laboratory and do something like a wind gate test. So this is a 30-second maximal test where you're going to see how much work can you possibly do in that 30 seconds. If you don't have access to a laboratory, you can do this on any protocol you want. This could be sprinting. This can be on like an air bike. This could be on a rower. Anything like that. Anything where you can exert maximal effort and you don't have to worry about technical problems. So I generally don't like to do things like a kettlebell swing or something like that. There's just too many other variables. You need to be able to go as hard as you possibly can, knowing you're going to get to a place of tremendous fatigue. Now, in the lab, we often use what's called a Bosco protocol, and you're going to stand on a force plate, and you're going to do as many vertical jumps as fast as you can, as high as you can for 60 seconds, and you're absolutely destroyed by like second 45. So we either use that Wingate protocol or that Bosco protocol. If you want, though, again, take any of those other places, 30 seconds or so, up to 45 seconds, up to a minute if you want. It doesn't really matter. And you just mark down the distance you cover. That's all you're... We don't really have standards for these things because it's going to be different. How far you can travel in 30 seconds on a treadmill is just going to be so different than sprinting in the field or on the assault bike or whatever. So what you really want to worry about there is, can you complete it? And then how awful do you feel afterwards? So what you really want to think about here is not those protocols, but this. You want to think about, can you get close to your predicted maximum heart rate? So the number we throw out is 220 minus your age. So if you're 50 years old, 220 minus 50, you should be able to get to a maximum heart rate of around 170 beats per minute. Now, that number is extremely generic. If you don't get there, that doesn't have any indication of your fitness. If you get higher, that doesn't mean you're any more fit. It's just a rough number. So here's what I want you to do. In this case, your heart rate recovery is the better metric. So I want you to get up to a maximum heart rate and then test your heart rate recovery. And what you should be looking for there is about a half a beat recovery per second. So you're going to get up to a place where you reach like absolute terrible exhaustion, right? Maximum fatigue. Test your heart rate and then count, right? Have a timer going. Within 60 seconds, you should have, again, that half a beat per second. You should have a heart rate recovery of 30 beats per minute. Within the next minute, so 2-minute recovery, it should be again half that, so 60 beats. Those are rough numbers to go by, and your 3-minute recovery is, again, half of that again. So that is the closest way. If your heart rate recovery is worse than that, then we know we have a problem in your anaerobic capacity or your cardiovascular capacity.
I love it. What about number 8, maximal heart rate? Because what you just described sounds a lot like maximal heart rate.
So this is your VO2 max. So the gold standard here is to actually go into a laboratory and get this thing done. So we can actually run a VO2 max test where you put a mask on, collect all your gases, and run you to there. And there's a very specific protocol for completion of a true maximum test. And any of the scientists will know that. If you don't have access to that, you can do a couple of tests. One of them is called a 12-minute Cooper's test. So this is simply time. You're going to run for 12 minutes as far as you can, and you're going to record the distance you covered. Again, you can go online to any number of calculators, enter that distance in, and that will tell you your proximal or estimated VO2 max.
So that's a 12-minute sprint?
12-minute sprint. Maximum distance you can cover in 12 minutes.
Keeping a steady pace the whole time or going?
Do whatever you want. The goal is to get maximum distance covered in 12 minutes. So that's anywhere between a mile to 2+ miles, depending on how fit you are. But you just do that Cooper 12-minute test.
Got it.
I told you. All right. So if you remember, aerobic capacity is 8 to 12 sort of minutes where you're going to see a real true test of that VO2 max. You simply can't get that in under a few minutes. So it is if you want, you can do a little gentler version of that. So there are a number of sub-maximal tests. In fact, there is a 1 mile walk test you can do. So again, all you're going to do is, in this case, you have to have some sort of either a stopwatch or ideally a heart rate monitor. And all you have to do is a Rockport 1 mile sub-maximal test. So you're going to walk a mile, record the time, record your heart rate at the end, enter those in, and those will give you, again, estimates of your VO2 max. So that's the like, oh my gosh, I can't run for 12 minutes as hard as I possibly can, or I don't want to do it. Or we have a lot of these in our executive program. It's like, my knee hurts too bad. I've got back pain when I run or whatever. Can I? Okay. And you do the walk test. And it's pretty accurate if you do it correctly. So technically, all you have to actually do is measure your heart rate on your, I can count 60 seconds, but it's just easier to work with everyone's watches and stuff now. Just wear the heart rate monitor, plug in those numbers. And again, those are all standard calculations. So anywhere you find those, you don't have to worry about the source. So you just enter your stuff in and they're going to be running off the same equation.
I like the idea of the 12-minute run. I'm going to give it a shot.
We did for years, we did a 1 mile version of this. And there's just a lot more science on the 12-minute Cooper test. So we did that. It's pretty good. And it is not even remotely close to fun.
It sounds like fun for other reasons.
Yeah. Right. Well, it is.
Fun in the sense that it reveals a lot. It's powerful, potent.
Super. Yeah. There's no hiding. You can hide with a leg extension test. It doesn't hurt that bad. But you cannot feel anything but the 12-minute run as far as you can test.
So these are really actually psychiatric diagnostic tests.
they are.
Of sorts.
For sure.
Number 9, long duration, steady state exercise. I think of this as AKA endurance, but as you mentioned before, there are other forms of endurance. So long duration, steady state exercise.
Yep. So you really want to think about this as not a standard number. This is, you should maintain consistent work output for over 20+ minutes. Okay. In this one, I want you to just pick something that it was in your lifestyle. So is there a loop around your house that you can do? Is there some protocol that you like to use before? And you're simply going to test your ability. Can you maintain work without stopping? That's all it needs to be. Now, ideally, I personally like to throw a little twist in here, which is, can you do this with nasal breathing only? That's when I feel really good. If you can go 30 straight minutes without needing to take a break, walking doesn't really cut it unless you're very, very unfit, in which case, if walking 30 minutes without a break is a challenge, okay, like there. But if you can, I want you moving at a non-walking pace. I don't care what zone this is, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't care. Show me you can maintain minimum of 20 minutes of work with no breaks, no intervals, no downtime. And again, ideally, breathing through your nose only.
I love this list, but it worries me a bit. Not because any one of these tests is necessarily that overwhelming, but because I'm unclear about how to arrange performance of these different tests.
Yeah.
For instance, do I separate them so I'm doing one test like long duration output on one day and I'm doing strength on another day? Those seem pretty obvious to me, but are there ones that one can combine on different days? How much time should one give oneself in between these tests, and how often should one do an assessment? Just as we don't want to necessarily evaluate body weight changes by getting on the scale 3 times a day, maybe once a day at the same time each day is more practical. How often should we be assessing our fitness for each and every one of these?
Well, the way that I would say this is you want to pick the one that is the worst and do that more frequently. So if, for example, you do the upper body strength test and you are fantastic. If you can bench press double your body weight, I don't need to test your bench very often for the average person. If you're not a powerlifter, like maybe once a year or something, maybe not even that. We just don't need to get there. However, if we then test your VO2 max, and in your 12 minutes, you cover a total of a half a mile, then like we might want to test that every month, right? And so we're going to let our priorities emphasize which one we're going to do more often. I would recommend doing this full battery once a year.
Full battery mean the entire list on one day?
The entire, not on one day, but within a week. So you could take a week. Now you could do these technically all in 2 days. 3-day split here is probably best. So if you were to just say, hey, this is like testing week. I actually love this for beginning of the year. Or whenever it is that you sort of change your training. But I think once a year, just like once a year, you should probably go to a physician and get full blood work, a full heart scan and everything like that. And then if maybe you had a heart issue, they would come back in and test you more frequently, whatever the case is, right? You should probably run through this. And you're going to be thinking, yeah, but I don't want to like give up on my exercise routine that week. Well, I promise you're not going to finish this week and think, I didn't do very much work this week. It's going to feel great. And then you're going to have a very nice barometer of exactly where you need to change and prioritize your training for the next quarter or half a year or wherever you want to go. If you want to actually do this every 6 months, that's really, we end up actually doing this, quite honestly, like more like every 6 months as a general test. That's a really good way to do. But if minimum, if you're arguing with me, give me once a year that you want to do this. So which order to do them in? The non-fatiguing tests you can do whenever. So this is the body composition scan, the FFMI, the body fat composition. All this stuff can be done wherever. I generally like to do that, though, as your very first activity. The reason is we know that acute exercise can heavily influence things like body composition measurements because of inflammation, water storage, etc. So it's easiest to just sort of get that off of a 48-hour rest. You want to make sure you don't do any hard exercise the day before a body composition test and probably 48 hours before that. So just start yourself off with that. Your movement test can be the same thing. You don't want to try to do a assessment of how well you're squatting if you're incredibly sore from your brutal squatting test. So tend to do those things when you're the most fresh. Then what you want to do is any skill or maximum strength or power goes at the very beginning of the day, and any fatiguing thing happens at the end. And so you could easily do this. All right, I'm going to do my power test, my broad jump. Great. You're not going to be fatigued at all from that. And on the same day, since I'm already pretty warmed up, now I'm going to roll right into my leg strength test. And since I'm really warmed up, I'm going to do my leg muscular endurance test right there. So this is a very common strategy we use. We'll do our 1 rep max leg extension, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever we need to do. Come back, load it to 75%, do as many reps as you can. Boom. You could roll right into then your upper body test or your grip strength test or anything else that you want to do there. Is there a little bit of influence? Yeah, but really for most people, it's not that bad. What influence, I mean, if you do a leg strength test, coming back and doing an upper body strength test afterwards, it's not that big a deal. Give yourself 15, give yourself 20 minutes. Give you plenty of time. So you can knock out your strength testing and muscular endurance testing all in one day. That could be, you could do your performance, your skill diagnostic, your power jump test, your strength, and your muscular endurance, and all that stuff is knocked out. You're going to have to come back on a separate day and do your anaerobic test. This is 30 seconds maximal endurance, things like that. You could, though, if you wanted, do that after your long duration test. Your long duration test, is just going to function as like a big warm-up. Or you could flip those things, or you could do them on separate days. You're going to have to do your VO2 max test on its own day for the most part, unless you wanted to do, again, your movement or your body composition sort of before those things. So you really have the ability to kind of mix and match. Ideally, this most realistically probably takes 3 days. If you want to separate them into 4 or 5, the more separation you do, the better data you're going to get. It's just a question of like how pedantic are you really trying to get here? And are you willing to lose 5% to then save a whole day? Then you can do sort of these things in multiple stacks. So that's how I would break it up.
So what I'm hearing is better to do it than to not do it.
Most definitely.
And be rational. Don't try and do your strength output late in the day when you're fatigued. You know, if you're going to combine some of the steady state endurance and maximal heart rate, fine. Understand there might be a slight deficit there, but test it the same way each time. And what you're really looking for is improvement.
Yep. And you could also do the heart rate recovery under any of the modalities. So you could do the heart rate recovery after your VO2 max as well. So you finish that thing and then just, again, do the same test for up to 3 minutes.
These are fantastic tools. I'm almost tempted to say that I'm willing to post my numbers, but that actually violates the sort of core principle that I think we're getting at here, which is that it's highly unlikely that anybody is going to be phenomenal across the board. I mean, certainly there will be individuals that are, but based on everything we talked about earlier, specificity of training and how extensively somebody's been training a certain way will, without question, lopside them, if you will, toward being better in some of these assessments and less good in others. And that's just simply the way that these adaptations work.
Yep. And it's not, you don't need to be optimal in all these areas to be quote unquote optimal health from this perspective. You just want to make sure, again, there's no severe performance anchors. This is what we call them, right? We don't want any of these severe constraints because you're going to get limited by that thing. And so what you want to do is move that up to just sufficient or concerning, right? And get it away from that. If you do that, that thing's not going to catch you. You're going to be able to continue to pursue optimization in any of the one things that you have a specific passion for, which is generally what moves people, right? You train so that you feel better. You train because you know there are all these benefits to it. And geez, this audience probably could list hundreds of them. But you also train because you generally like to get better at something. A lot of us have something. And so you want to make sure that you're not going, hey, I know you're good at endurance, but you really shouldn't train anymore. We don't want that message. Not at all. I want you to love your training. We just want to make sure that you're not loving that so much that you're not taking some blinders off and missing another area, which would actually, again, you pull that performance anchor, this whole ship sails faster with less effort and less friction.
What I love about this is also that, as you've described it, it's not just for athletes or people that are super into fitness. It's also for people that just want to be healthy and want aesthetic changes. And that's why they're exercising, which I think accounts for a fairly large percentage of people out there.
Yeah.
So I think what you described is incredibly well-structured, incredibly clear, and incredibly actionable. So I want to thank you for that. I'm serious about my willingness to do this and at least share those numbers with you. And I think for most people that are seeking what you listed off before, aesthetic changes, functionality, and longevity, it's clear that all 9 of these are going to be important in some regard or another.
So before we close out, I want to go back and finish off the metrics for VO2 max because I don't actually think I gave you numbers on that. So in general, for men, a minimum number we want to look at here is 35 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And for women, that'd be about 30. So we can actually push a lot higher on those things. In reality, I want to see men above 50.
If I could just interrupt you for a second. When you say 40 milliliters per kilogram, milliliters of what specifically?
Yeah, so what actually those metrics mean is the first one, milliliters, is oxygen. So it's amount of oxygen. Kilograms is body weight. So it's how much oxygen can you bring in per kilogram of body weight per minute. So it is a volume of oxygen per your size in a time duration. In fact, the way that you calculate it is you multiply your cardiac output by what's called your AVO2 difference. Your cardiac output is your heart rate times your stroke volume. So how much blood you're pumping out per pump is your stroke volume. How many times you're pumping or you're beating. You multiply that by your AVO2 difference. Your AVO2 difference is artery minus vein difference. So it's the amount of oxygen in your arteries minus the amount of oxygen in your vein, which is going to tell you how much you took up in your capillaries in your muscles. So you take those two factors, multiply them together, and there's your VO2 max.
You know, as you were describing that, I imagine you getting to an fMRI machine and seeing that equation lighting up in your brain because clearly it's committed to memory very well. Thank you for that clear description.
Yeah. So to finish those numbers, I really, truly want to see a man above 50. And I'm not even really stoked until I get above 55. In fact, it's sort of funny. Dave Kostel, whose lab I did my PhD in, he was retired by the time, but he's, again, one of these legendary figures in exercise physiology. Started in the 70s. He would always say there's no human excuse to be below 60, which I was always like, damn, that's really actually pretty hard to get to.
Was he at 60 or above?
He's still actually setting world records in these last couple of years and is all the masters records for swimming and cycling and stuff. So he was a super, super fit guy. So he was always above 60. He's probably like 50 something now, even though he's 80 or whatever.
80 years old.
Yeah,
with a VO2 max of 50.
He's probably really not 50. He's probably going to remember that earlier we talked about how I had the 92-year-old who had the VO2 max of 38. Dave's probably going to break that record when he gets there. I'm sure. In fact, I guarantee you he has